February 1942. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly, a vast expanse of water and danger. On the surface, the remnants of the U.S. Pacific Fleet were licking their wounds after the devastating attack on Pearl Harbor. Beneath the waves, however, a new kind of war was beginning, one that would be fought not with blinding explosions and roaring cannons, but in silence, in shadows, and with deadly precision. The American submarine force, still small but determined, prepared to take the fight to the heart of the Japanese Empire. The U.S. Navy had long understood that controlling the sea lanes was essential. Japanese shipping routes carried troops, fuel, and raw materials critical for sustaining their sprawling Pacific Empire. Every ship that sailed from Japan to the front lines represented not just supplies, but the lifeblood of an expanding war machine. American submarines would become the invisible predators in this vast oceanic battlefield, striking when the enemy least expected it. Submarine warfare in the Pacific was not about glory or spectacle. Unlike aircraft carriers and battleships, submarines operated in silence, unseen, and often misunderstood even by their own commanders. The men who served on these vessels endured claustrophobic conditions, extreme heat, and the constant threat of depth charges. Every mission was a test of endurance, patience, and nerves. To survive, crews had to become part of their machine. Every switch flipped, every gauge monitored, every silent command given through tight coordination. The first patrols were tense experiments in strategy and nerve. Many submarines were sent to scout Japanese shipping lanes, their orders simple yet daunting. Report what you see, and sink any enemy vessel you can. The crews quickly learned that success relied not only on skill and bravery, but on the quiet mastery of stealth. The sound of a diesel engine, the vibrations through the hull, even the slightest miscalculation in periscope observation could end in an explosion of water and steel. Yet, even in these early days, the potential of American submarines was evident. Unlike surface ships, submarines could approach targets without warning, striking deep within enemy-controlled waters. Patrols revealed the vulnerabilities of Japanese convoys, which often traveled with minimal escort. Torpedoes, although flawed in early 1942, proved devastating when they hit. For every freighter sunk, the Imperial Japanese Navy felt the first tremors of a war they could not yet see fully coming. Training played a crucial role. Submarine crews studied charts of the Pacific, learned ocean currents, and practiced silent maneuvers. Officers drilled endlessly on attack patterns and evasive actions, learning to anticipate both the sea's unpredictable moods and the enemy's tactical responses. As the submarines slipped beneath the waves, their diesel engines hummed quietly, their periscopes barely breaking the surface, and a new type of warfare was unfolding. One in which patience, precision, and nerves were far more lethal than sheer firepower. By mid-1942, these silent hunters had begun to weave an invisible web across the Pacific. Japanese supply lines were disrupted, convoys vanished without a trace, and morale in enemy ports began to falter. The psychological impact of submarine warfare was profound. Sailors knew that beneath every calm stretch of ocean could lurk an unseen predator, waiting silently for the perfect moment to strike. This was not the roaring clash of battleships. This was the quiet, patient, and deadly work of the submariner. In the coming months, as the United States refined tactics and technology, the submarine force would grow in strength and confidence. They would learn to coordinate attacks, evade detection, and exploit weaknesses in enemy convoys. Each mission would teach lessons in strategy and survival, lessons that would come to define the undersea war in the Pacific. By mastering silence, patience, and the unforgiving physics of the ocean, these submarines would become one of America's most effective weapons against the Japanese war machine. The dawn of the silent hunters had arrived. Beneath the waves, steel leviathans waited, engines humming softly, periscopes scanning the horizon, and men ready to execute the deadly choreography of stealth warfare. The battle for the Pacific was entering a phase invisible to most, yet decisive in shaping the outcome of the war. Here, in the shadowy depths of the ocean, a revolution in naval warfare was quietly taking place. Spring 1942. The Pacific was a vast chessboard, and every American submarine was a piece moving silently, guided by patience, skill, and deadly intent. The quiet tension of the ocean masked a deadly reality. Early torpedo technology was deeply flawed. The Mark 14 torpedo, the primary weapon of the U.S. submarine fleet, was expected to strike fear into Japanese shipping lines. In reality, it became a source of frustration, mystery, and sometimes tragedy. Submarine crews, had high hopes for the torpedoes that slid silently into the depths. Designed to explode beneath enemy hulls, the Mark 14 promised devastating damage. But the reality of the early months of war was far different. Torpedoes often ran too deep, missing their targets entirely. Magnetic exploders failed to detonate under ideal conditions, and contact detonators frequently misfired. A well-aimed shot could result in nothing more than a torpedo disappearing into the water, leaving the enemy ship untouched and the submarine exposed. Patrol after patrol tested the men and machines. Captains learned through bitter experience that calculations based on theory rarely matched the chaos of war. Ocean currents shifted, target speeds varied, and the slightest misjudgment could mean hours of silent pursuit ended without a single hit. The psychological toll was immense. Submariners were already living in extreme conditions, cramped, humid, with diesel fumes filling the narrow hull, and now every failed torpedo added weight to the burden. Each missed shot was a reminder of the precariousness of their existence beneath the waves. Yet failure bred innovation. Crews experimented with depth settings, angles of attack, and firing techniques. Commanders meticulously recorded every detail, from sea conditions to torpedo trajectory, searching for patterns that might reveal why these deadly weapons so often failed. In the confined environment of the submarine, every observation mattered. A single insight could mean by mid-1942, American submariners had adapted to the unforgiving environment of the Pacific. Life aboard a fleet submarine was a study in contrasts. Moments of eerie silence, punctuated by sudden bursts of lethal action. Submarines like the USS Gato, Tamber, and Sargo became floating microcosms of war, with crews living and fighting in spaces not much larger than a city apartment. Inside the narrow hull, every inch was accounted for. Bunks stacked like shelves, valves and gauges lined the walls, and the low hum of machinery was a constant companion. Diesel engines roared on the surface, while electric motors hummed below, propelling the submarine through waters filled with unseen danger. Crews shared every task, from navigation to maintenance, from cooking to cleaning, and from scanning the periscope to monitoring sonar. Every crew member played a role in survival, and every role carried immense responsibility. Meals were simple and often repetitive, yet they were a rare comfort. Salted meat, canned vegetables, and hardtack were staples, occasionally supplemented by fresh catches from the ocean. The smell of diesel, unwashed bodies, and damp metal mingled in the tight corridors, creating an atmosphere both oppressive and strangely familiar. Sleep was scarce, taken in short bursts. As the submarine slipped silently through enemy waters, danger was constant. Depth charges, Japanese destroyers, and the ever-present risk of mechanical failure kept every sailor alert. The periscope became a lifeline, a small window into the vast ocean, where a single enemy ship or aircraft could spell destruction. Submarine commanders owned patience and precision, often shadowing convoys for hours or days before seizing the right moment to strike. Timing and stealth were as lethal as torpedoes themselves. The psychological strain was immense. Fear, tension, and camaraderie coexisted in equal measure. Letters from home provided brief solace, but isolation was the norm. Crews relied on humor, shared rituals, and unspoken understanding to maintain morale. The ocean outside was a deadly stage, yet inside the steel walls, life went on. The flicker of a reading lamp, the laughter of a crew member, the quiet anticipation before a calculated attack. Despite the hardships, the submariners' resolve hardened. Each patrol became a test of endurance, skill, and nerve. The ocean was their battlefield, and the submarine was both their weapon and their sanctuary. Every successful attack reinforced the vital role these underwater hunters played in cutting Japan's supply lines, shaping the course of the war without ever being seen. The lessons learned in these cramped, perilous spaces would shape the tactics, strategy, and survival skills that defined the silent war beneath the waves, a conflict fought far from the headlines, but with consequences that echoed across the Pacific. Life aboard a World War II submarine was a study in contrasts. Moments of tense anticipation followed by stretches of monotonous routine, all contained within a steel tube beneath hundreds of feet of water. Every day, every decision, every action carried the weight of survival. The Pacific Ocean, vast and unforgiving, was both the stage and the adversary, demanding endurance, discipline, and an unwavering sense of purpose from those who served beneath its surface. Crew quarters were among the most confined in any branch of the military. Sailors slept in stacked bunks, often only a few feet long, sharing personal space with the hum of machinery, the scent of diesel, and the ever-present dampness of the hull. privacy was nearly non-existent. The crew quickly adapted, learning to sleep, eat, and work in shifts, coordinating their movements in narrow corridors to avoid accidents in the constantly moving vessel. Food, while nutritious, was another challenge. Long patrols meant relying on canned goods, salted meats, and preserved rations. Fresh produce was rare and highly prized. Meals were eaten quickly, often in shifts, and the galley, though small, became a center of camaraderie. Despite the hardships, laughter and storytelling were essential. Submariners forged bonds that would last a lifetime. Their trust in one another a vital component of operational effectiveness. The daily routine was dictated by patrol orders, navigation, and maintenance. Engines and batteries required constant monitoring. Torpedoes needed regular inspections. Hull integrity and ballast systems were checked continuously. Any oversight could be fatal. Drills for emergencies, from fires to flooding, were conducted with precision. Silence was golden, especially when submerged, for even the smallest noise could betray the submarine's location to enemy destroyers and aircraft. Mental endurance was as critical as physical strength. The psychological toll of prolonged confinement, isolation, and constant threat of depth charges weighed heavily on crews. Submariners relied on discipline, routines, and camaraderie to maintain morale. Letters from home, shared stories, and quiet reflection provided brief respite from the tension that never fully left the vessel. Watch duty was relentless. Crew members rotated shifts, keeping eyes on the periscope, ears attuned to sonar pings, and hands ready at torpedo controls. Every blip on the sonar, every ripple on the surface, could signal danger or opportunity. Decisions had to be made in seconds, balancing aggression with caution. One miscalculation could mean the loss of the vessel and all hands aboard. Recreation was limited, but vital. Card games, small personal projects, and the occasional storytelling session kept spirits alive. Submariners learned to adapt to their environment, finding small joys amidst the stress. Yet, the underlying reality was clear. Beneath the waves, death could arrive silently, leaving no warning, no escape, and no time for regrets. The uniqueness of submarine life created a breed of sailors unlike any other. They were engineers, navigators, tacticians, and psychologists, all rolled into one. Success depended on cohesion, skill, and adaptability. In the vast Pacific, these small crews became the invisible hand of naval strategy, striking where the enemy least expected, and vanishing before retaliation could be mounted. The experiences aboard submarines in the Pacific would become legendary. Accounts of bravery, ingenuity, and resilience filled post-war histories, painting a picture of a silent war waged beneath the waves. A war in which human endurance and technological mastery combined to create a force that, while unseen, shaped the outcome of battles and campaigns across the ocean. The first encounter with the enemy was a baptism by fire for every submarine crew in the Pacific. Months of training, drills, and preparation led to this moment, when silence and patience collided with sudden chaos. Japanese convoys, heavily guarded and seemingly unassailable, became both targets and tests of a crew's skill, courage, and resolve. Submarines relied on stealth, patience, and precision. Detecting a convoy required careful observation through periscopes, the subtle vibrations felt through the hull, and the faint echoes picked up by sonar. Every decision had consequences measured in seconds and lives. Commanders plotted attack courses with meticulous attention to distance, angle, and timing, often calculating torpedo trajectories while balancing the ever-present risk of detection. The first attack was always the most nerve-wracking. Crew members knew the stakes. A successful strike could cripple enemy supply lines, while failure, or being detected, could mean a deadly counterattack. The torpedo room became the nerve center. Each torpedo loaded, each target calculated, was a gamble of life and death. Precision was essential. A single misfire could alert the enemy and compromise the submarine's position. Once the torpedoes were launched, moments stretched into eternity. Crew members watched periscopes intently, listening for the telltale explosions that confirmed a hit. Success brought exhilaration, a surge of confidence, and a renewed sense of purpose. Failure demanded composure, quick thinking, and sometimes rapid evasive maneuvers to escape depth charges and counterattacks. Japanese destroyers were not passive targets. Trained to detect submarines, they prowled the waters with depth charges, sonar sweeps, and aggressive tactics. The Pacific was a deadly game of cat and mouse. Submariners had to anticipate enemy movements, often diving deeper, changing course, and using the shadows of the ocean to their advantage. The margin for error was minimal. Mistakes were unforgiving. The impact of these early attacks rippled far beyond the battlefield. Every sunken cargo ship meant shortages of food, fuel, and military supplies for Japanese forces. Every successful strike disrupted the logistics of war, demonstrating that submarines, though small and invisible, could wield strategic influence far beyond their size. The Pacific Ocean became a silent battlefield where unseen forces shaped the fate of millions. Despite the intensity of combat, coordination and communication within the submarine remained vital. Commands had to be precise, and trust between officers and crew was absolute. The navigator guided the vessel, the sonar operator detected threats, the torpedo officer executed attacks, and the captain made decisions that balanced risk and opportunity. In these moments, every skill owned during long patrols proved essential. Psychological resilience was tested with each encounter. The tension of waiting in silence, the rush of executing an attack, and the anxiety of evading retaliation weighed heavily on every crew member. Letters from home, brief periods of camaraderie, and shared determination provided the mental strength necessary to endure these repeated trials. These early engagements taught lessons that would shape the entire Pacific campaign. Commanders learned when to strike, when to retreat, and how to maximize the destructive potential of their limited torpedo supplies. Over time, tactics evolved. Surface attacks at night, wolf-pack strategies coordinated with other submarines, and careful observation of enemy behavior became standard practice. The first bloodshed in these encounters was more than just physical. It was a proving ground for strategy, innovation, and the indomitable spirit of the submariner. By the end of the initial patrols, crews understood that success relied not just on technology or weaponry, but on discipline, coordination, and the unwavering courage to face a vast, silent enemy beneath the waves. Submarines, once considered auxiliary forces, emerged as a decisive tool of warfare. The lessons learned from these first engagements echoed throughout the Pacific theater, shaping the tactics and strategies that would define submarine operations for the rest of the war. Each encounter was a testament to human ingenuity, endurance, and the lethal efficiency of an invisible predator of the deep. By 1943, the U.S. Navy had begun refining submarine tactics into something far more lethal than solitary patrols. The Wolfpack, inspired by German U-boat strategies in the Atlantic, American commanders adapted these techniques to the vast expanses of the Pacific, where coordination and communication became as deadly as torpedoes themselves. A single submarine could sink a ship, but multiple submarines operating in unison could paralyze entire supply lines and strike terror into the enemy. Wolf packs were carefully orchestrated units, often consisting of 3 to 5 submarines, working together to track convoys and execute synchronized attacks. Intelligence played a critical role. Cryptographers and radio intercept teams provided details of Japanese shipping movements, enabling submarines to position themselves in ambush zones weeks in advance. Every captain knew the target, the timing, and the roles of the other submarines. The operation began with a shadowing phase. One submarine would identify the convoy, often from miles away, and relay its course and speed to the other pack members. Stealth was paramount. The slightest detection could lead to catastrophic losses. Submarines navigated silently beneath the waves, adjusting depth, speed, and heading to remain invisible while tracking their prey. When the time came, the attack phase turned calm waters into chaos. Torpedoes from multiple directions struck simultaneously, leaving enemy crews confused and disoriented. The Japanese convoy, trained to react to single submarine attacks, was ill-prepared for these coordinated strikes. Ships were damaged or sunk before destroyers could mount an effective counterattack, demonstrating the psychological as well as physical impact of wolfpack tactics. Communication between submarines was a delicate balance of caution and necessity. Radio silence was observed until the moment of engagement, and even then, transmissions were brief and encrypted. Submarines maneuvered using prearranged signals and codes, with each captain understanding the broader strategy without giving away their position to enemy listeners. The coordination was a testament to training, discipline, and the sophisticated use of technology. The Wolfpack strategy magnified the effects of limited resources. With torpedoes in finite supply, striking with multiple submarines increased the likelihood of success while reducing wasted shots. Commanders would assign primary targets to one submarine while others intercepted escorts or blocked potential escape routes. Each engagement was a carefully choreographed performance, where timing, positioning, and precision dictated survival. These operations inflicted staggering damage on Japanese logistics. Convoys that had once supplied troops across the Pacific became high-risk ventures. By mid-1943, reports from the Imperial Japanese Navy revealed mounting losses. Entire transports, loaded with fuel, munitions, and reinforcements, were being destroyed before reaching their destinations. The impact extended beyond the immediate destruction. Fear of the invisible wolf packs slowed Japanese shipping, forced rerouting, and diverted resources into anti-submarine defenses. The psychological strain on both sides was immense. Submariners faced tense hours or even days submerged, listening for the faintest signs of detection, knowing that a single mistake could be fatal. On the other hand, Japanese sailors operated in constant fear, aware that any convoy could be ambushed at any moment by predators they could neither see nor anticipate. The vast ocean became a domain where invisibility equaled power and information determined. Wolfpack operations also spurred innovation within the U.S. Navy. Submarine commanders experimented with night surface attacks, using deck guns against lightly defended ships, or coordinated maneuvers to divert enemy escorts while another submarine struck. Lessons learned from each engagement refined tactics, with after-action reports meticulously analyzed to improve efficiency and effectiveness for future missions. By late 1943, the Wolfpack concept had evolved into a dominant force in the Pacific. Japanese shipping losses escalated, stretching the enemy's supply lines and undermining morale. Entire campaigns, from Guadalcanal to the Philippines, were influenced by the unseen hand of coordinated submarines. Each successful mission was more than a tactical victory. It was a demonstration of mastery over the invisible realm of underwater warfare, where strategy, patience, and lethal precision dictated the outcome. The Wolfpacks exemplified the lethal combination of intelligence, technology, and human courage. Submarines, once considered auxiliary players in naval warfare, had become the silent arbiters of the Pacific, striking fear into enemy fleets and shaping the course of the war with calculated devastation. The era of the lone submarine hunter had ended. The age of the coordinated predator had begun. By 1944, the silent war beneath the Pacific had reached a turning point. What began as isolated submarine patrols had evolved into a systematic campaign designed to choke the Japanese Empire from within. Steel hulls, moving quietly through deep water, were accomplishing what air raids and surface battles alone could not. The steady destruction of Japan's logistical lifelines. Japan's war machine depended on the ocean. Oil from the Dutch East Indies, iron ore from Southeast Asia, food from occupied territories, all of it traveled by sea. Unlike the United States, Japan had limited domestic resources and even fewer alternatives when shipping lanes were cut. Every tanker sunk was not just a loss of tonnage. It was a blow to factories, airfields, and frontline units thousands of miles away. American submarines exploited this vulnerability with ruthless efficiency. By targeting oil tankers and high-value cargo ships, submariners learned to inflict maximum strategic damage with minimal exposure. A single successful patrol could cripple fuel supplies for entire naval formations. Japanese warships increasingly remained in port, not because they lacked crews or weapons, but because they lacked fuel to sail. The numbers told a devastating story. By mid-1944, U.S. submarines were sinking more Japanese shipping than all other Allied forces combined. Entire convoys vanished without survivors. Ports once bustling with maritime traffic fell silent. Japanese commanders faced an impossible dilemma: concentrate ships into heavily escorted convoys that became perfect submarine targets, or disperse them into smaller groups that were even easier to hunt. The psychological impact was profound. Japanese sailors boarded transports, knowing that the ocean itself had become an enemy. There were no warning sirens, no visible attackers, only sudden explosions and the sound of rushing water. Survivors spoke of torpedoes striking without warning, ships breaking apart in seconds, and the terrifying realization that escape was often impossible. As losses mounted, Japan rushed to expand its anti-submarine warfare capabilities. Escort vessels were hastily built, crews poorly trained, and sonar technology lagged behind American advancements. Depth charges were deployed in massive numbers, but often blindly, with little understanding of submarine positions. The ocean absorbed the explosions, and the submarines endured. Reinforcements never arrived. Battles were lost before they were even fought, decided not by gunfire, but by the unseen hand of submarines operating hundreds of miles away. By late 1944, the outcome was no longer in doubt. The Japanese Empire was being slowly suffocated, its arteries severed by a force it could neither see nor stop. The silent killers had done their work. Without dramatic fleet engagements or headlines, American submarines had dismantled an empire one ship at a time, proving that wars are often won not on the battlefield, but in the supply lines that sustain it. Behind every successful patrol was not just a machine of steel and diesel, but a crew bound together by trust, and a commander whose decisions could mean survival or annihilation. As the submarine war intensified, certain boats and captains emerged from the shadows, becoming legends in a conflict defined by secrecy. These men did not seek fame. Most of their victories went unreported at the time. Yet, their impact on the Pacific War was undeniable. American submarines were often outnumbered, lightly armored, and constantly hunted. What gave them the edge was leadership. Commanders like Dudley, Mush Morton of the USS Wahoo, Richard O'Kane of the USS Tang, and Eugene Fluckey of the USS Barb redefined what submarine warfare could be. They rejected overly cautious doctrine and embraced aggressive tactics that pushed both men and machines to their limits. The USS Wahoo became a symbol of this new approach. Under Morton's command, the submarine attacked enemy ships in shallow waters previously considered too dangerous. Night surface attacks, once seen as reckless, became devastatingly effective. Morton's boldness inspired an entire generation of submariners, proving that surprise and initiative could overcome technological and numerical disadvantages. No story was more tragic or heroic than that of the USS Tang. Richard O'Kane, one of the most successful submarine commanders in history, led his crew through relentless patrols that shattered Japanese shipping. The Tang's final mission ended not at the hands of the enemy, but through a malfunctioning torpedo that circled back and struck the submarine itself. Survivors captured by Japan would later provide invaluable insight into the war beneath the waves. Then there was the USS Barb, a submarine that took unconventional warfare to an entirely new level. Under Eugene Fluckey, the Barb not only sank ships but conducted one of the only ground combat operations by American forces on the Japanese home islands. A small landing party sabotaged a railway line, marking the only instance of a U.S. military ground attack on Japan itself. It was a reminder that submarine warfare was not confined to the depths. It could reach anywhere. Life aboard these legendary submarines was unforgiving. Crews endured weeks of heat, exhaustion, and constant tension. Personal space did not exist. Sleep came in short, uneasy shifts. Yet morale remained surprisingly strong, fueled by dark humor, ritual, and an unshakable bond between shipmates. Every successful patrol reinforced the belief that their silent war mattered, even if no one knew their names. These submarines were more than weapons. They were symbols of adaptation and resilience. Their commanders understood that innovation was survival. They experimented with tactics, trusted their instincts, and accepted risks that others would not. In doing so, they transformed the submarine from a supporting asset into one of the most decisive forces of the Pacific War. By the end of the conflict, these steel wolves had rewritten naval history. Their victories were measured not just in tonnage sunk, but in strategies reshaped and empires undone. Long after the war ended, the legends of these boats and their commanders would continue to influence submarine doctrine, silent proof that courage, creativity, and leadership can turn the tide of war. By 1945, the Pacific Ocean no longer belonged to the Japanese Empire. What had once been a vast highway of supply and power had become a hostile, unforgiving battlefield. The submarine campaign, waged quietly for years, now delivered its final and most decisive blows. Japan's merchant fleet lay in ruins, its navy crippled not by grand fleet engagements, but by the relentless pressure of unseen enemies beneath the waves. American submarines faced fewer targets but greater danger. The scarcity of Japanese shipping forced submariners into coastal waters and heavily defended routes. Mines, patrol aircraft, and desperate anti-submarine escorts made every patrol a gamble. Yet the mission remained the same: deny Japan the ability to move fuel, food, and men. Each remaining ship became a priority target, its destruction magnified by the empire's already desperate condition. Japanese naval strategy began to unravel. Warships were immobilized by fuel shortages, aircraft training was curtailed, and entire fleets became hollow forces, powerful on paper, but unable to operate. Even advanced vessels, including aircraft carriers and battleships, were rendered strategically irrelevant if they could not leave port. Submarines had achieved what direct confrontation could not: paralysis. The human cost was devastating. Civilians felt the impact as shortages spread across the home islands. Food rationing tightened, factories slowed, and transportation networks collapsed. Island garrisons, once supplied by regular convoys, were abandoned to starvation and isolation. Many Japanese soldiers would never see combat again, trapped on distant islands by a sea they could no longer cross. Despite this collapse, Japan fought on. Submariners continued their patrols through the final months of the war, often unaware of the broader strategic picture. They hunted isolated freighters, small coastal transports, and even fishing vessels pressed into military service. These missions lacked the dramatic scale of earlier patrols, but their importance was no less critical. Every sinking hastened the inevitable end. As the war drew to a close, American submarine losses mounted. Mines claimed boats in narrow straits. Aircraft spotted periscopes near the surface, and depth charge attacks grew more intense. The price of victory was paid quietly, without fanfare. Many submarines vanished without a trace, their crews entombed in steel hulls on the ocean floor. Their sacrifice would remain largely invisible to the world they helped to save. When Japan finally surrendered in August 1945, the submarine campaign stood as one of the most effective naval operations in history. U.S. submarines had sunk over half of Japan's merchant tonnage, strangling the empire's economy and war effort. It was a victory achieved not through spectacle, but through endurance, precision, and patience. The sea had turned against Japan long before the final bombs fell. By the time peace arrived, the outcome was already sealed beneath the waves. The silent killers had delivered the final blow, not in a single moment, but through years of relentless pressure that left an empire unable to breathe, move, or fight. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, the ocean kept its secrets. Thousands of ships lay scattered across the Pacific floor, silent witnesses to a war fought largely out of sight. Among them were the submarines and crews who had reshaped naval warfare forever. Their story did not end with victory. It became a blueprint for the future of conflict at sea. The Pacific Submarine Campaign proved a revolutionary truth. Control of the seas no longer depended solely on surface fleets. Battleships and carriers might dominate headlines, but submarines controlled outcomes. They demonstrated that a nation could be defeated not by destroying its armies directly, but by severing the supply lines that sustain them. This lesson would echo through every major naval doctrine that followed. In the decades after World War II, navies around the world studied the Pacific Campaign in detail. Tactics refined by American submariners, wolfpack coordination, stealth patrols, intelligence-driven targeting became standard practice. Advances in sonar, torpedo guidance, and underwater communication were driven by lessons paid for in blood during the war. The submarine evolved from a risky auxiliary weapon into the ultimate instrument of deterrence. The Cold War transformed this legacy into something even more formidable. Nuclear-powered submarines, capable of staying submerged for months, carried the logic of silent warfare to its extreme. The Pacific Campaign had shown that invisibility was power. Now, that power could decide the fate of the entire planet. Beneath the world's oceans, submarines became guardians of uneasy peace. Their presence felt precisely because they could not be seen, yet the human element remained unchanged. Modern submariners still live in confined steel hulls, separated from sunlight and fresh air, bound by trust and discipline. The fear, tension, and isolation experienced by World War II crews continued to define life beneath the waves. Technology advanced, but the psychological reality of submarine warfare endured. For many veterans, recognition came late, or not at all. Submarine operations remained classified for decades, and their achievements often went unnoticed compared to more visible battles. Only years later did the full scale of their contribution become widely understood. Memorials now stand in harbors across the United States and the Pacific, honoring crews who never returned and boats that never surfaced. Today, the wrecks of submarines and merchant ships rest undisturbed on the ocean floor, serving as both graves and historical monuments. They remind us that war is not only fought with explosions and headlines, but with patience, endurance, and unseen sacrifice. The Pacific itself carries these memories, etched into rusted hulls and silent corridors deep below the surface. The story of submarine warfare in the Pacific is ultimately a story of transformation. It changed how wars are fought, how power is measured, and how silence itself can become a weapon. Long after the echoes of depth charges faded, their impact remains beneath the waves, where history still whispers.